Anna Birtwistle is connecting by Zoom. Welcome, thank you.
So good morning, everyone.
Good morning. Good morning.
I'm very sorry not to be with you in Paris today in person, but thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
I'm delighted today to be talking to you on behalf of the Employment Lawyers Association, ELA. We are the National UK Employment Lawyers Association. My name is Anna Birtwistle. I'm a partner at Farrow & Co in London, but I'm here talking in my capacity as the International Committee Chair of ELA and a member of the Management Committee. I thought I'd start by saying a few words about ELA itself for those that are unfamiliar with the association, and end with some observations about the direction of travel for employment law in the UK via some observations about the potential ripple effect that the US administration's shift away from DEI may or may not be having on the UK's employment law landscape. So first, about ELA. So ELA was founded in 1992. We currently have nearly 7,000 members, all of whom are specialist qualified employment lawyers, and they come from the two branches of the UK legal system, that is solicitors and barristers. The members are drawn from employment lawyers that represent employers, employees, from trade unions, the voluntary sector, industry, and the judiciary. And as an association, we don't give legal advice, and crucially, we remain apolitical. So what are ELA's fundamental aims? Well, like some of the other national employment law associations that are represented in person today, the first is that we promote best practice in employment law. And second, we work to support and represent the interests of the UK employment law community. We have a management committee, and we oversee the work of ELA through 8 subcommittees. We have an editorial committee that puts out a magazine 10 times a year. We have an in-house and junior committee, which is targeted to those members who are in-house or junior to provide targeted professional development and networking opportunities. We have a pastoral care committee, which is something that exists in recognition of the importance of lawyer well-being, and it's no coincidence that it was founded in the pandemic. We have a training committee which holds online and in-person training, and our flagship event is an annual conference which takes place in London or elsewhere in the UK, and in recent years it's been attended by more than 600 members. But finally, we have 2 committees that I thought I would pause to talk about, and those are our Legislative and Policy Committee and the International Committee, of which I am chair. The Legislative and Political Committee is representing ELA's outward-facing role, and it undertakes the important work of ELA in shaping and influencing employment legislation in the UK. Our neutrality on political issues and the depth and wealth of the knowledge that comes from our membership means that we act as a voice of authority and we're respected in UK employment law matters. As part of that work, we comment on issues and take part in government consultations in the UK. And we speak not from the perspective of employers or employees, but rather our focus is on what is helpful to ensure that the law works. So by way of example, in the last year, we have responded to calls for evidence on the Labour government's new employment rights bill. We've consulted on modernising the framework for industrial relations, on guidance around sexual harassment in the workplace, and on the rules that govern litigation in the Employment Tribunal. So coming to the International Committee itself, my committee has as its aims bringing an international perspective on key developments of law in the UK, on providing international training and content for our members, and finally, on building relationships with employment lawyer networks around the world. And of course, it's this final aim that's brought me here today and why I'm so pleased to be talking to you at the International Employment Lawyers' second annual conference. Establishing employment law networks and relationships couldn't be, in my view, more important than it is now. It's trite to say, but the world in which we operate as employment laws, reflective of the world of work itself, transcends borders. And I think being able to share knowledge and understanding and forge relationships with colleagues across the world benefits us as lawyers personally. It also benefits our clients. Whenever I have the opportunity to meet fellow employment lawyers around the world, I'm always struck by how easy it is to strike up a conversation and commonality between us. Now, that might be, as I'm sure you all agree, the fact that employment lawyers tend to be people. But more than that, I think there's a commonality from the fact that each of us have been drawn to this area of law because of the way in which it is intrinsically tied to current affairs and how it acts as something of a mirror for the cultural and the political shifts that might be taking place in our home jurisdictions. As time has gone by in my career, though, I think it's clear to say that it's not just political and cultural changes at home that impact our jobs as employment lawyers, but also the political, economic, cultural shifts that are taking place overseas. On this note, I thought it might be of interest to spend the last 5 minutes of my presentation talking about not only the direction of travel of employment law in the UK, but also considering the extent to which that direction of travel may be impacted by seismic geopolitical shifts, and in particular, those that we're seeing across the pond with the new US administration. No doubt there's been many conversations take place in Paris already amongst you about the equality, diversity and inclusion strategies that are coming under fire in the United States. As you're all well aware, the current administration under President Trump is seeking through executive orders to dismantle DEI programs, both across federal agencies, as well as pressurizing private companies to end their DEI practices. The shift in the US administration's policy towards DEI marks obviously a stark departure from the previous administration. So I've been asking myself, what does this mean for the UK? Well, we can't ignore the potential for a ripple effect, and UK employment lawyers, particularly those representing international companies that have operations in the US, are being asked by clients to consider what this means for UK DEI policies. Concerns are rightly being raised as to whether we'll see UK companies rowing back on their DEI policies, and no doubt the same concerns are being raised in your home jurisdictions. So let me share my thoughts based on the current political and cultural climate in the UK, and finally end with Ila's views on what this all means for DEI in the UK. On the political front, you'll be aware that after years of Conservative leadership in the UK elected a Labour government in a landslide victory in July 2024. Now, UK and US politics are, of course, vastly different, but it won't be lost on you that where the UK has swung to the left, in the US, of course, we've seen a shift from a Democratic to a Republican government during the same period. In the UK, one of the Labour government's central manifesto commitments to get elected was a significant upgrade to UK worker rights. And those commitments were enshrined in a new employment rights bill, which right now is being tabled and arguably represents the biggest shift in employment law protections in the last 25 years. As an employment lawyer, me and my colleagues have spent hours poring over the bill and crystal ball gazing on what those changes will mean for our clients in practice. The overhaul under the ERB touches almost every element of employment law. So only by way of example, it includes proposals to ban zero-hour contracts and fire and rehire practices, to strengthen trade union rights, to enhance family-friendly rights and sick leave, change the law on flexible working requests, strengthen the law on sexual harassment. But over and above all of those changes, perhaps the most single significant change relates to unfair dismissal law. And whilst in the current day, it requires 2 years service for an employee to gain unfair dismissal rights, under the new ERB, it's proposed that that will become a day one right. So what does the road look like ahead? Well, whilst the detail is still being thrashed out, what we can say with certainty is that in the UK, there is going to be a far greater emphasis on increasing worker rights. So putting into context what I've talked about in terms of the DEI and US, what I would say is that from a legislative perspective at least, I do not believe that the UK is likely to follow suit with the UK when it comes to the UK's established framework in terms of discrimination, DEI equality. Indeed, the Prime Minister as recently as last month made several statements that have indicated a continued commitment to DEI policies. But what then culturally in the UK? Well, there are, of course, parts of UK society that are aligned with the US administration's views. And indeed, like all countries, there are going to be political parties, in the UK being the Reform Party, most obviously, that will seek to represent those views. That said, I'm quite confident that DEI will remain firmly on the agenda in the UK. Outside of the legal framework that I've just talked about, there are strong cultural and business commitments to DEI in the UK that are driven by an understanding that diverse and inclusive workplaces are not only fairer, but more innovative and competitive. Turning back then to ELA. I mentioned at the outset that ELA as an association is apolitical, and that is extremely important. So can ELA even express a view on the rollback of DEI in the US? Well, while the issue of DEI itself is deeply political, the law in the UK, being the Equality Act 2010, is something that ELA can speak on. And legally, what we say as ELA is that there is a very clear line between the US administration's attack on DEI in the US and the legal position as it applies to the UK. While the US has, within clear limits, had affirmative action in place, which has impacted workplace hiring as well as, for example, university entrance, by contrast, the position in the UK is very different. Indeed, the UK has never had any affirmative action comparable to the United States. The only potential positive action that is lawful in the UK is the very limited tie-break provisions that exist under the Equality Act, and are in fact very rarely used, and Section 158 of the Equality Act, which allows employers to take proportionate action with respect to underrepresented groups in the workforce, albeit those actions are all aimed with a view at creating equality of opportunity as opposed to directly impacting hiring decisions. On this basis, by reference to the law and differences in the framework legally between the UK and the US, ELA, albeit remaining apolitical, has set out a statement in which it has advised UK employers on the risks of rowing back on their DEI policies in response to the US administration's approach. To do so, in ELA's view, poses a significant legal risk to UK businesses for them to be able to defend, in particular, claims of indirect discrimination, or to meet the new duties that exist to take reasonable steps to prevent sexual harassment. I think with that, my 10 minutes is probably up. So just to say thank you for allowing me the time to talk to you today. Sorry again not to be in Paris, and I hope that you have a wonderful conference, deepen your connections and make new connections. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna. Thank you.